Good morning, everybody. Just a few announcements. Again, FIA is asking for donations for schoolroom supplies for the teachers at Meister Elementary in New Chicago. We'll be accepting those donations through July 1st, and there is a list on the table by the nursery. Please bring some in. Thank you. Next week after church service, we'll be having a class downstairs for new members, and hopefully we'll be able to have them sign the book the following month when Pastor Tom is here. After service today, Sawyer and Ari are selling cookies that they baked this morning, and the money will be going to the displaced people in an apartment building in Hobart that was found out to be just unlivable, and they had to leave immediately. So you know it must have been really bad. I mean, nobody could live there. So that's it. Thank you.
Good morning, and welcome to the worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart, Indiana. My name is Ruth, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I participate in the life of this church on the Right Relationship Committee. We are a religious community of people with diverse beliefs and shared values. Our diverse beliefs are expressed in our 6 sources, and our shared values are expressed in our 7 principles, both of which can be found online at uua.org. Together we strive to grow spiritually, build community, and live our values in the world. We are currently waiting for our minister, Tom Bozeman. I guess he'll come the first week in August, right? We are looking forward to that. But when we do not have a minister on the pulpit, we invite members or guests to share a special message with us. And this such Sunday, we are fortunate to hear from John Halstead. We are currently streaming our services online. The Joys and Sorrows portion of our service is, however, private, and we will take a break from streaming during that part of the service. The sermon portion of the service will be recorded and will be available for future viewing on Facebook, YouTube, and the church website. Let your friends on Facebook and Twitter and any other social media know that you are attending worship service at #First Unitarian Church of Hobart. If you don't know what that is, ask James, I assume. The hashtag part thing. Due to the increase in COVID cases, and we are asking that all in-person attendees of the Sunday services wear a mask covering both nose and mouth. We are doing this again because there are elevated cases of COVID again in this area. You can either bring a mask or we will provide one, and we thank you for your consideration of our community's health and safety. For now, please take a deep breath. And another. And join us in the spirit of reverence.
Our opening words come from an essay, Dark Ecology, by Paul Kingsnorth. He writes, "We are not primarily rational, logical, or scientific beings. Our human relationship to the rest of nature is not like the analysis of bacteria in a petri dish. It's more akin to the complex love-hate relationship we have with lovers or parents or siblings. This is who we are, vital and impossible to peer review. You can reach part of it with the analytical mind, but the rest will remain buried in the ancient woodland floor of human evolution, in the depths of our old ape brains, which see in pictures and think in stories." Please join us now in the opening hymn, number 38, Morning Has Broken. Please rise as you are willing and able.
Please remain standing and join me. We strive to create a worship space which is both spiritual and safe. However, we recognize that not everyone can attend in person. We extend a special welcome to everyone who is joining us virtually today. And thank you to our tech team for making the live stream and the recording possible. Due to increase in COVID cases, we want you to greet your neighbor at this time with a contactless wave or hello, and take a moment to greet your neighbor and wave your hands and letting them see your smile. Let's start without him. From all that dwell below the Now is the portion of our time where we will have our joys and sorrows. We express our greatest joy and our deepest sorrow in community here. We believe that a joy shared is magnified, and a sorrow shared is diminished. We pause, listening to what arises from within our hearts. Your joys and sorrows will not be streamlined, nor will it be part of the recording which is made public. We will not be passing the microphone, so please stand up, speak loudly your name, and briefly share what your concern or joy is. If you cannot hear the speaker, please raise your hand and I will paraphrase with the microphone. Anyone have a joy or sorrow? We now turn the time over to John.
So as I think all of you know, every year our church holds a water communion ceremony at the beginning of autumn. And we bring water which we have collected from special places and pour it into a communal bowl, to which we combine a small amount of water that we've saved from previous years. It's a simple and yet powerful ritual for me and for many of us. While we were social distancing during the worst of the COVID pandemic, however, we had to hold services online, and so our annual water communion had to be altered to fit a virtual format. So instead of each of us pouring water into a communal bowl, our service leader poured water into a bowl by himself while we watched on our screens. It was the best we could do under the circumstances, and I thank him for that. But I felt like something was lost, and I think it was something essential. Something about being physically present, being with other bodies, seeing the movement of the water in the flesh, and that feeling that you can almost smell or taste the water in the room. All of these sensations add to the feeling of being physically connected to a larger world, to a specific time and place, and to a wider community of beings. The pouring of water, or pouring libations, is part of my own spiritual practice as well. I'll pour libations out on special occasions like solstices and equinoxes. I'll go outside to a special place that I've set aside in my yard, and I'll carry a vessel of water or other liquid. I'll probably recite a poem or an ancient religious text that fits with the season or which resonates with me in some way, and I'll pour the water slowly onto the ground. Pouring libations is an ancient spiritual practice which involved pouring some kind of liquid onto the earth or onto a stone. The liquid might be water or wine, olive oil, or honey. To the ancients, these were offerings to the gods done in exchange for blessings or to show care and honor. But the practice serves a somewhat different purpose for me. I'm an atheist and a religious naturalist, which means that I don't look for spiritual explanations for natural events. But I do use other words to describe my spirituality, and one of those is animist, or animism. Animism is the experience of being enmeshed in a more than human world of living beings. You're going to hear me say this phrase a lot, more than human or other than human. My atheism doesn't help me explain what is missing from our virtual water ceremony, but animism does help me explain what is lost when our spirituality goes virtual. Animism isn't a belief system, it's an experience. And so my sermon's going to be broken into two parts. First I'm going to try to speak to your minds, and then I'm going to try to speak to your bodies. First, I'm going to explain 4 concepts which will help explain the concept of, or the experience of, animism. And then we're going to do the story for all ages. And then I'm going to offer 4 practices which will help, which I hope can help those of you have the same experience more often for yourselves, because I believe all of us have this experience. So the first animistic concept is interconnectedness. This is something that Unitarians are familiar with from our 7th principle, but talking about interconnectedness can seem very abstract until we root it in our physical bodies and the immediate world around us. Conscious breathing is one of the easiest ways to feel our interconnectedness. As we inhale, we are literally breathing the world into us, and as we exhale, we are offering ourselves to the world. It's easy to forget about the existence of air. We treat it like it's literally nothing. And yet it's a tactile presence. We are immersed in it just as fish are immersed in water. And the air isn't empty. It's full of matter, even small living beings, some of which are innocuous and some, as we are acutely aware of now, are harmful to human beings. And it's not just our breath either. Our own skin isn't a solid barrier. It breathes too. It absorbs some of what it touches. And our bodies are literally crawling with microscopic beings inside and out, many of whom we have a symbiotic relationship with. These are just some of the more immediate ways that we're connected to the world. We are enmeshed in an interconnected web of reciprocal relationships with a more than human world. The second animistic concept is called participation, which comes from the philosopher Owen Barfield's phrase, original participation. Barfield explains that in antiquity, human beings experienced the world as alive and felt themselves to be an intimate part of it, rather than just mere observers. Over time, I think we've lost that original sense of participation in the world. In order to better understand the world, we've developed a method of separating ourselves from nature and conceptually stepping outside of it to become its observers, to see the world as an object. This is a powerful and useful conceptual tool. But it has become not just our scientific method, but our ordinary, everyday way of relating to the world. This is why modern life has a way of cutting us off from everything, from the natural world, from each other, and even from our own bodies. The result is individual alienation, social disconnection, and environmental devastation. It also leaves us vulnerable to the pseudo-enchantments of capitalism, addiction, and absorption in virtual technology. Yet, I think a lot of us still have this nagging feeling that something essential is missing. And to understand what's missing, I think it's useful to appreciate the distinction between conceptual knowledge and participative knowledge. Conceptual knowledge is like a tool or a utensil which helps us do something. And participative knowledge is like sustenance or food which keeps us alive. The tool can help us get the food, but it's not a substitute for the food. We have a tendency in our modern culture, and I think sometimes in Unitarianism, to overvalue the tool and undervalue the food. And so, in so doing, we deprive ourselves of the participative knowledge which alone can sustain us spiritually. The third animistic concept is rewilding. When we say something is wild, we mean that to some extent it's beyond human control. We are experiencing the rapid disappearance of places that are wild, which we call wilderness. But at the same time, we're also realizing that in a very real sense, there is no place that isn't wild to some extent. There's no place where human power is absolute, even in our own backyard. Think about all those weeds. Climate change, for example, is just one reminder that our control over nature is always incomplete at best. The term rewilding refers to the restoration of wilderness areas and the reintroduction of apex predators and keystone species like wolves and bears, where they were previously exterminated. But there's a rewilding that can happen to us, human beings, as well. In a way, we human beings have become domesticated to our own civilization and our own technology. By our attempts to completely control our environment, we've domesticated ourselves. But at our core, all of us are still living things. We are wild animals beyond the control of the hierarchies that we build for ourselves. We can experience a rewilding of ourselves by spending time in wilder places, but even in our domesticated spaces, we can experience a rewilding of ourselves by cultivating our senses and seeking intentional relationships with the other than human beings who fill our world. The fourth animistic concept is re-enchantment. The line between our ordinary civilized world and the sensory-rich world of wild nature can be very subjective. So to one person, farmland can seem wild in comparison with an urban setting that they live in. To another person, a state park can be more of a human environment than a natural one. The difference between these two worlds is a subjective and it's a matter of degree, which means that we don't have to go into a national park to find wildness. It's possible to find it in unlikely places. We might, for example, discover something wild in an office park retention pond, or in the cracks in the asphalt of a parking lot. It requires unfamiliarizing ourselves with the world around us. There's so much that we take for granted that our gaze gradually passes over as we rush past. We need to look at the world afresh with the eyes of an artist or a child. That's what's meant by the re-enchantment of the world. So what is it that I'm doing when I pour libations onto the earth? I'm not making an offering to gods, who I don't really believe in, nor am I making an offering to the earth or to nature, which would receive the water I'm offering in some way anyway. Instead, these libations are a way of restoring my experience of interconnectedness and original participation with the world. They're a way of rewilding my senses and re-enchanting my world. So as I pour the water or wine or honey onto the earth, I create, in the form of a stream of liquid, a living connection between myself and the earth. It's a visual and visceral representation of that connection. And as I do this, I experience a feeling of emptying and a feeling of filling, as if I am both the vessel that pours and the earth which receives. I am emptying because I'm giving up substance or sustenance which I might take into my own body instead. And it's filling because my body is already connected with the earth so intimately that by giving to the earth, I am giving to myself. In the ritual, I don't just think this. The ritual helps me feel it. So when I pour this libation and watch the stream of water flowing onto the earth and being absorbed by the soil, the connection between the earth and me moves from the conceptual to the participative, from my flesh, from my mind, to my flesh and bones. I'm going to pause now for our story for all ages.
I'm in Charge of Celebrations by Bird Baylor. Pictures by Peter Purnell. Sometimes people ask me, aren't you lonely out there with just the desert around you? I guess they mean the bare grass and the yuccas and the cactus and the rocks. I guess they mean the deep ravines and the hawk nests and the cliffs and the coyote trails that wind across the hills. Lonely? I can't help laughing when they ask me that. I always look at them surprised, and I say, how could I be lonely? I'm the one in charge of celebrations. Sometimes they don't believe me, but it's true, I am. I put myself in charge. I choose my own. Last year, I gave myself 108 celebrations besides the ones that they closed school for. I cannot get by with only a few. Friend, I'll tell you how it works. I keep a notebook, and I write the date, and then I write about the celebration. I'm very choosy over what goes in that book. It has to be something I plan to remember the rest of my life. You can tell what's worth a celebration because your heart will pound, and you'll feel like you're standing on top of a mountain, and you'll catch your breath like you were breathing some kind of new air. Otherwise, I count it just an average day. I told you I was choosy. Once, I saw a triple rainbow that ended in a canyon where I'd been the day before, and I was halfway up the hill, standing in a drizzle of rain. It was almost dark, but I wouldn't go in because the rainbows, of course. And there, at the top of the hill, a jackrabbit was standing, up on his hind legs, perfectly still, looking straight at the same triple rainbow. I may be the only person in the world who's seen a rabbit standing in the midst, quietly watching 3 rainbows. That's worth a celebration, anytime. I wrote it down, and I drew the hill, and the rabbit, and the rainbow, and me. Now, August 9th is Rainbow Celebration Day. And I was lucky on Coyote Day, because out of all time, it had to be one moment only that a certain coyote and I could meet, and we did. Friend, you should have been there too. I was following deer tracks, taking my time, bending down as I walked, kind of humming. I hum a lot when I am alone. And I looked up in time to see a young coyote trotting through the brush. She crossed in front of me. It was a windy day, and she was going east. In that easy, silent way coyotes moved, she pushed into the wind. I stood there, hardly breathing, wishing I could move that way. I was surprised to see her stop and turn and look at me. She seemed to think that I was just another creature following another rocky trail. That's true, of course, I am. But she didn't hurry. She wasn't afraid. I saw her eyes and she saw mine. That look held us together. Because of that, I will never feel quite the same again. So on September 28th, I celebrate Coyote Day. Here's what I do. I walk the trail, I walk that day, and I hum softly as I go. Finally, I unwrap the feast I've brought for her. Last time, it was 3 apples and some pumpkin seeds and an ear of corn and some big soft homemade ginger cookies. The next day, I happened to pass that way again. Coyote tracks went all around the rock where the food had been, and the food was gone. Next year, I'll make it even better. I'll bring an extra feast and maybe eat there too. Another one of my greatest of all celebrations is called the Time of Falling Stars. It lasts almost a week in the middle of August, and I wait all year for those hot summer nights when the sky goes wild. You can call them meteor showers if you want to. Me, I like to say falling stars. All that week, I sleep outside. I give my full attention to the sky, and every time a streak of light goes shooting through the darkness, I feel my heart shoot out of me. One night, I saw a fireball that left a long red blazing trail across the sky. After it was gone, I stood there looking up, not quite believing what I'd seen. The strange thing was, I met a man who told me he had seen it too while he was lying by a campfire 500 miles away. He said he did not sleep again that night, and suddenly it seemed that we two spoke a language no one could understand. Every August of my life, I think of that. Friend, I've saved my New Year celebration until last. Mine is a little different from the one most people have. It comes in spring. To tell you the truth, I never did feel like a new year started January 1st. To me, that's just another winter day. I let my year begin when the winter ends, and morning light comes earlier, the way it should. That's when I feel like starting new. I wait until the white-winged doves are back from Mexico, and wildflowers cover the hills, and my favorite cactus blooms. It always makes me think I ought to bloom myself. And that's when I start to plan my New Year celebration. I finally choose a day that is exactly right. Even the air has to be perfect, and the dirt has to feel good and warm on bare feet. Usually it's a Saturday around the end of April. I have a drum that I beat to signal the day. Then I go wandering off, following all of my favorite trails to all of the places I like. I check how everything is doing. I spend the day admiring things. If the old desert tortoise I found last year is out strolling around, I'll go his direction a while. I celebrate with horned toads and ravens and lizards and quail. And friend, it's not a bad party. Walking back home, kind of humming, sometimes I think about those people who ask me if I'm lonely here, and I have to laugh out loud. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. So I've already talked about pouring libations as one animistic practice. In the time that remains, I want to offer 3 more practices that can help you experience these concepts more often of interconnectedness, participation, rewilding, and reenchantment. So the second practice is called enchanting the everyday. Enchanting the everyday means creating space where the world around us, even seemingly mundane, inanimate objects, can manifest as living presences with which we are in intimate relationship. Ritualizing ordinary acts can help enchant the everyday. So Robin Wall Kimmerer, who I know a lot of you are fans of, is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. She's an American Indian and a professor of environmental science, and she blends the wisdom of her indigenous heritage, which she's been rediscovering as an adult, with her scientific training. If you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass or I think it's Gathering Moss, I encourage you to. Kimmerer writes about the summers that her family spent camping in the Adirondacks in New York, and how a seemingly mundane act became a sacred ritual for her family. So in the mornings when they were fixing breakfast, her father would take the steaming coffee pot to the edge of camp and face the sun and pour a little bit out onto the ground and say the words, "Here's to the gods of the mountain," or "Here's to the gods of the river or the forest," wherever they were. And the children learned instinctually that this was a sacred moment during which they should be quiet and be reverent. And she explained in the book that this ritual taught her that the world is bigger than human beings, that it's home to other than human beings who are worthy of our respect and our thanks. Now you might think that Kimmerer's father learned this from his indigenous ancestors, and in fact, his ancestors did express thanks to nature with offerings, as did probably all of our pagan ancestors. But Kimmerer's father and her family no longer knew those ancient ways because they'd been taken from them by white boarding schools and other forms of cultural imperialism. Still, though, her family found their own way to offer thanks to the more than human world. The words were different. The gestures were not quite the same, but the spirit was identical. Years later, Kimmerer asked her father where this coffee ceremony came from, and he said it started in a very mundane way. He was just clearing the coffee grounds from the spout. But it became something more, something sacred. He said it was just what we did. It seemed right. Kimmerer explains that this is the power of ceremony. It marries the mundane to the sacred. It turns coffee into a prayer. I like that. It turns coffee into a prayer. Now, you can do this with any mundane action. Some of the experiences that I have ritualized or ceremonialized in my own life include taking my first breath in the morning, my first conscious breath in the morning, noticing the sun through the window in my bathroom, holding my hands under the flowing water from the shower head, taking my first bite of food, and bending down to touch the earth when I go outside in the morning before I get in my car. Any of these simple actions can be transformed from a mundane action into a way of enchanting the everyday, an opportunity for communion with the more than human world. So I didn't tell you, almost all of these pictures are ones that we've taken, places we've been, and mostly in our backyard, actually. This was in Guam. So the third practice that I want to talk about is called seeing another being as a thou. The mountain that Kimmerer's father poured coffee to was not aware of him in any sense that we're familiar with, or his actions, but nevertheless, there was and always is an interaction going on between us and the more than human world. Experiencing this, though, requires us doing something tricky, overcoming the subject-object distinction that we've been trained to, and that is our default way of relating to the world. The Jewish philosopher Martin Buber talks about the distinction between I-it relationships and I-thou relationships. He uses a tree as an example. Encountering a tree as a thou or a you or a subject is different from encountering a tree as an it or an object. This doesn't mean, he says, that we're looking beyond the tree or within the tree for something like a soul. We're not looking for a mythological dryad or an ent, if you're a Tolkien fan. It also does not mean anthropomorphizing the tree in the sense of projecting human consciousness onto it. It does mean awakening our sensual selves to the reciprocal relationship which exists in every encounter. Even something as seemingly one-sided as looking at another being or looking at a tree is actually an interaction, because when we see the tree, we're not doing so in a vacuum. We share air with the tree. We're literally breathing the air that it's exhaling, and vice versa. We share sunlight with the tree, which we could not even see the tree without the sunlight bouncing off of the tree. And we interact with the tree through these mediums using all of our senses, and the tree interacts with us too. The ecologist David Abram is the author of Spell of the Sensuous, and he's the inspiration for a lot of these ideas about animism that I'm talking about. And he says that this way of interacting with the world as a thou is actually our most natural and direct way of experiencing the world. This is the way that children interact with the world. Our objectification of other beings, he says, which turns beings from thous into its, is actually very artificial. Seeing another being as a thou is our natural way of seeing the world, but is no longer our habitual way of being. We've become habituated to seeing the world as populated by inanimate objects rather than animate subjects. Seeing and hearing and smelling and touching the world in this way is not easy for us any longer. So when we look at a tree, our default way isn't even really to see the tree. We see our idea of a tree, which we project onto the world. We unconsciously fill in the gaps with our ideas of what a tree should look like. It takes an artist's eyes or a lover's eyes to really see. It takes a willingness to get our hands dirty, to get up close and personal with nature, and to use all of our senses, our ears, our eyes, our noses, our skin, and even our tongues sometimes. But most of all, it requires a willingness to be open to receiving as well as perceiving, an openness to being seen when we see, to be heard when we hear, and to be touched back when we touch another being. The fourth practice, and the last one that I want to talk about, is called speaking to nature instead of speaking about nature. Language doesn't just reflect our experience, it shapes our experience, including our experience of nature. To a certain extent, our experience is limited by what we can say about it. So, for example, in certain cultures, in our culture, we lack words for certain colors, and that may actually limit our ability to see those colors. Another example, which is peculiar to the English language, is that we use, that unlike other languages, a lot of other languages, we don't use gendered pronouns for non-human objects. We only have the gender-neutral it when we're talking about other than human beings. Unless it's a pet, I think, is probably an exception to that. But it is not a neutral word. If you called your grandmother it, that would be an insult. So calling someone an it is a refusal to recognize their subjectivity or their personhood, and it reduces them to an object or a thing. So what does that mean for how we relate to nature? When we talk about a tree or another living being as it, we tend to relate to them as, instead of persons, as objects. And because of this, we feel free to use them without care or respect and without any sense of community or reciprocity. So Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about this as well. She talks about changing our language as a way of changing our relationship to the world. And she actually suggests using new pronouns for talking about other than human beings. She suggests using he as a gender-neutral pronoun for living beings, and the plural of that would be kin, K-I and K-I-N. But there's other ways that we can develop a language of reciprocity, one which recognizes that human beings are not the only persons on the planet. Kimmerer is a scientist, and she acknowledges in her book that there's a taboo against anthropomorphizing the natural world. But she draws a distinction, and I think this is really interesting, between personifying and anthropomorphizing. Anthropomorphizing means ascribing human qualities to something other than human. It's kind of a form of human imperialism over the natural world when we do this. But personifying just means recognizing the personhood of a being and recognizing that humans are not the only kind of persons. There's tree persons and salmon persons and bird persons. Kimmerer even extends personhood to rocks. And I'll admit I struggle with that one. But it makes sense to me when I think about rocks as part of a complex, self-regulating living system that some people call Gaia. The pace of the life of a rock, or even a tree, is very much slower than ours. But we and the rock and we and the tree are still intertwined in a larger life, which includes the flow of air and water, the growth of plants, and constant interaction with humans and other than human animals. So, here's how you can put this into practice. You can go outside and find something, a tree or a bird or even a stone, and you can talk to it. You can address it as you or thou. Speak out loud when you do this, and it's probably going to feel awkward at first, but you can push through that. Pay attention to how you feel, especially how you feel about the plant or animal or mineral that you're addressing your attention to. The point is not to communicate with the plant or animal or mineral, which obviously does not understand your human language, but to change how you relate to them. So remember not just to talk, but to ask questions and to listen, just like you would in a conversation. This will put you in a receptive state of being. Talking to a tree or any other than human being isn't about communicating with them using human language. It's about experiencing the communion that is already happening. So this is the goal of all of these practices. Enchanting the everyday, seeing another being as a thou, and speaking to nature. Each of these practices has helped me experience the interconnectedness of life, my participation with it, the rewilding of my senses, and the re-enchantment of the world. These practices require no belief in the supernatural, only a willingness to be open to a world that is much, much larger than us, a more than human world full of animate beings who are in constant communion with each other and with us. And if all else fails, you can take a cup of water outside in the morning as the sun rises in the east. Breathe in and breathe out and pour the water onto the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was beautiful. Now is the time in our service for our offering. We give to remind ourselves how many gifts we have to offer We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and sacred space, and we give with the faith that together we have enough. There is an online link on the screen, well, usually there is, for regular donations, and you can also contribute in person by putting paper money and loose change in baskets and cups that we will pass around. The money in the basket goes to sustaining the mission of our community, and the money in the cups goes to our Faith in Action Committee, and a different charity has been chosen every month. Pete, will you explain what the charity is for this month? And I'll grab the baskets and we can have volunteers come forward.
Just give me one moment.
Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you, John. That was fantastic. And Ruth. As many of you know, a week ago, 11 families were made homeless here in Hobart. Suddenly, a routine welfare check of a basement apartment by the city health inspector found a situation so, in their words, vile and such an immediate threat to life and health that they condemned the building and locked everyone out of their apartments, which left an additional 10 families suddenly homeless and unable to get their belongings except for some trivial things. So that was a week ago. They're living in a hotel until Tuesday, and our member, Myra Seek, took it upon herself. She organized a meeting with them last night, and Carl Wolf and Stephanie Dow joined us. She interviewed 7 of the families, of the 10 families, trying to research how to get some services, because the city is not really taking care of them except to get a hotel till Tuesday. They are in desperate need. These are working families, young people, some of them working multiple jobs. A sudden catastrophe has hit them. So we talked last night, and there are 2 families. So Stephanie Dow works for the VA, and she's getting 2 families some help because there's a veteran involved. Carl, who works with homeless people all the time, is using his resources to get services. Myra works for Hearts in Motion, and she's going to get furniture and what she can from her contacts. But those things take time, and there are 2 families in really desperate need that we're going to help today. So instead of our planned loose change for social change being for every town, thank you, every town for gun sense. We're going to collect today for these 2 families to get them some immediate help. Try to get these were inexpensive apartments, naturally, and trying to find new homes that they can afford is really proving to be a struggle for them. So please be as generous as you can, and for in the cups, sorry, in the social change cups, I want to thank the Buddhist group, which has promised $500 to help these 2 families. So please be as generous as you can. Thank you.
for your prayers, your presence, your service, and your gifts. We are truly grateful. Thank you. Now stand for the closing hymn, number 328, Sought the Word, Woods on Summer. Number 328, please stand as you're willing and able.
Our closing words, when I find them, are by David White. Sorry. I'm just going to read them off the screen. Your great mistake was to act the drama as if you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely even you at times have felt the grand array, the swelling presence, and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you courage. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentors of things to come. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you. And the tiny speaker in your phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you. Everything is waiting for you. Thank you.
Please join me now as we extinguish the chalice. The words are printed on the laminated handout in the pews. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you for attending the First Unitarian Church of Hobart. Please join us now for our in-person coffee hour in the Garden Parish Hall. If you're attending online, we invite you to carry on with your own coffee hour with the others online. Anyway, thank you, everybody.